Hi everyone! So for the school law presentation, I chose to specifically focus on academic freedom of expression. Being in secondary education and specifically focusing on social science where there's a lot of controversial topics, this one related to me the most. So I kind of found it the most interesting. And so we can dive in and kind of look at the case law study and just some things more in depth concerning this. So to begin, what is academic freedom? So according to the textbook, Fisher, Schimmel, and Stellman in School Law, what every teacher should know, academic freedom includes the right of teachers to speak freely about their subject, to raise questions about traditional values and beliefs, and to select appropriate teaching materials and methods. And then just some more on that. The length and boundaries of academic freedom are often more limited for high school and elementary age teachers as opposed to college level professors. This is generally because high school and elementary are public schools, so you have to be a bit more careful about what is said and what is taught in the context of that classroom, whereas college is private education, and just a general difference in age group as well. I mean, you go from teaching children and teens to young adults, and so obviously you can expand on your views more so in the adult classroom than you can in the child-centered classroom. Okay, so controversial topics in the classroom. So specifically, areas of information that are likely to cause a spike in heated discussion and disagreement are considered controversial. And these topics generally include political beliefs, more specifically right now, Republican versus Democrat, and different opinions regarding policies. There is also the topic of religious beliefs. I believe that this has kind of always been a topic of controversy. And topics in school that touch on this specifically are science. So you have the theory of evolution, differences in belief of sexual orientation, and then just the general belief of separate church and state, which kind of breaks down to that idea of prayer in school, the relation to different denominations and how that can be upsetting for some. And then, of course, there's just the general personal opinion that differs, morals and values. We have different beliefs. We're a country of multiple cultures, so this is something that is easily disrupted in the classroom. So controversial materials in the classroom. Controversial materials includes texts, videos, etc. that may touch on controversial topics like those discussed previously. These materials may use profanity and they may exhibit questionable behavior. So, using curse words and in some cases, explicit content, violent, sexual content, etc. The textbook also states that academic freedom protects the use of these materials, especially in relation to secondary education. So the material has to be relevant to the subject, appropriate for the age and maturity of the students, and does not cause disruption. I know specifically when I was in high school, in our English and history classes, we watched several movies and videos that were rated PG-13, and I believe one that was rated R actually when we were seniors. And in all cases like this, we had to be sent home with a parental permission slip, even for the students that were 18, just to be careful, just so the parents were aware of what was taking place in the classroom. And I think that's a pretty crucial step to making sure that you don't step on any toes in a scenario like this. So controversial materials, I thought this was really interesting. This is something that we've talked about a lot, and especially in a high school setting. And so that's the banned book list. Popularized across the media, the infamous banned book list refers to a grouping of classic novels that have been challenged throughout academic history due to the nature of their content. And this applies specifically to a historical context. So the website Banned and Challenged Classics, or the article Banned and Challenged Classics, includes a list of The Great Gatsby. There is some, what am I trying to say, like sexual nature in The Great Gatsby itself, and it's kind of questioned, and there's a lot of relationship related issues, and so a lot of parents have questioned the use of it in the English classroom, if it's really valid to discuss. The Catcher in the Rye is pretty self-explanatory. There's a lot of profanity, There's a lot of sexual content. There's also some government-related topics and societal issues that are approached in that as well. And To Kill a Mockingbird, this relates more to the history side of things. It explores racial tensions, and there's a large use of racial slang and profanity, which aren't generally used in the terms of slang and profanity for this, but more so in relation to explain the historical context of the time, which is really similar to my personal favorite book, Gone with the Wind. There is a really large use of racial slang and a little bit of suggestive content. However, though, I think banning these books is a bit questionable in itself because you lose a lot of that historical context. It's more so we should look at it as we're learning from our mistakes, I believe. So those are just kind of some areas and topics that are generally not utilized in the public education classroom at this point. So subjects relating to controversy. Social studies, political and government-related topics are often questionable when approaching them. Religion in a historical context can easily become a topic of question depending on how it's presented. Current events, which is also somewhat political related, just kind of how they're discussed in the classroom, especially if they're of a violent nature. And then, of course, there's the object of sensitive historical events, which would relate to topics like slavery during the Civil War, the Holocaust. Just as an educator, I believe it's important to be sensitive when you approach these issues so as not to cause any discrepancy. So, and then science, we have evolution, or the theory of evolution, which conflicts with a lot of religion's beliefs. There's also the issue of different opinions regarding vaccines. Stem cell research and abortion are also two topics in science, specifically in secondary education, that are touched upon that many find to be questionable. So it's important to remember to always represent both sides of an issue when presenting it in the classroom. And then in English, like we just touched on with the banned book list, a lot of that is related to the materials being used. So if they're suggestive or explicit, profanity, anything of that nature is going to be somewhat questionable. And then there's freedom of speech. When is it applicable? The First Amendment right. So as a private citizen, the rights of a private citizen extend much beyond that of an employee who is on the job. Obviously, hate speech is not protected. It's considered a threat to society or an individual, depending on how it's stated. Freedom to decorate with and wear political, religious, or explicit clothing items is protected. As a private citizen. You're only representing yourself as an individual at that point. Duties of the job as an employee. Freedom of speech is limited while speaking up for the duty of one's profession, so lecturing as a teacher, so on and so forth. And that runs into question because it's a reflection of that company or that school. You're advocating on behalf of them. There's also posting about or discussing political or religious beliefs outside of the classroom. That is protected unless extremist views could negatively impact the classroom. So like recently, extremist views would fall under the idea of maybe neo-Nazis or a group similar to that. That would probably remain in question due to the nature and the violence associated with such groups. That would become questionable if a teacher was participating in something like that. And then as far as an educator, you cannot wear or decorate with political, religious, or explicit items that publicize your views. And these are generally not protected. I mean, in the classroom, especially in like a history classroom, you're going to see maybe some teachers will utilize, propaganda, but it has to be used as an example. It cannot be a reflection of their personal views. And then we have Sturzing versus Fort Bend Independent School District. In 1967, civics teacher Henry Sturzing replied to a student-initiated question stating that he did not oppose interracial marriage. Which was quite the questionable topic for the time, especially, just right in the height of the civil rights movement. Parent complaints ensued, bringing subject to the attention of the administration. Sturzing is then told to teach only from his provided material. Don't deviate from the content, basically. And he discusses this issue with a colleague relating to the difficulties of avoiding controversial topics in a civics class with an older group of students. Basically what he's saying is how do I provide them with quality education if we can't even discuss the events, taking place around us. Prior to a school board meeting discussing his conduct, Sturzing directs his classes. He writes this statement on the blackboard: academic freedom in the classroom. Watch local government in action tonight at 7:30 in the school board administration building. Question of public policy: shall a teacher in local school be discharged or retained at his teaching position? So this was controversial in itself, as he kind of got the students involved. So continued, the board directs Sturzing to only teach from his materials once again. He replies that he cannot simply ignore these issues as they're pertinent to the student's education. He continues to teach the material that he wants to bring in, and he covers Vietnam news-related stories. He even includes a race relations unit. Nothing which actually interjects his personal opinion, but more so covers the topics that are pertinent to what's taking place in that day and age. And this obviously causes tensions with parents and administration to heighten. He is then fired by the board. It's an affirmed termination, and Sturzing appeals to the Texas Commissioner of Education, and he pursues legal action. Once the trial and the evidence is submitted and due process takes place and everything, Sturzing wins the trial and receives compensation for lost wages. The justification on that is he taught in a professional manner and did not subject students to indoctrination or propaganda. So basically, he represented both sides of the story. It was for educational purposes. He did not interject his own opinion or tell students what they should or shouldn't believe, which is always important to remember when representing topics like this. And here are some references. So thank you, everyone. Like I said before in summary, I chose to do this topic as in relation to studying secondary education, social science, especially with this last practicum. This is something that my mentor teacher and I have discussed, and how it's so important to be careful and always cover both sides of an issue, regardless of your personal beliefs. And I just think that's really important. So thank you, guys.